Math Champions. Welcome to Math with Janet. I'm Janet Moore. Today's topic is rounding to the nearest 10 and 100. We are going to do an activity called Literally Nearest on the number line. This is designed for third grade students and targets standard 3.nbt.a.1. In previous grades, specifically in second grade, students have been introduced to three-digit numbers and they have explored them with base 10 blocks on the number line by decomposing them into hundreds and tens and ones and by doing a little bit of problem solving and comparing with them. In third grade, students learn the concept of rounding formally for the first time. Often this is taught as a random rote rule where you look at a digit, decide if the number next to it is greater than or equal to 5, and then do some random manipulating of the number based on whether one of the digits is 5 or greater. That rule isn't a bad rule if it's built on meaning, but when that is the only understanding that students have of the concept of rounding, they will mess it up every time. The only thing you are teaching them in that situation is to follow a random rule that they don't understand. However, when you start with the meaning of rounding, when you actually think about what numbers are near the number that you've been given, then eventually students can come up with that rule on their own. And it's not really a rule as much as it is a shortcut that they discover that helps them be more efficient. And then it's a really meaningful thing and a useful tool for them. For today's activity, we're going to need some materials. The first thing that we're going to need is a number line that goes from 0 to 1,000, and you can download the template and cut it out and tape it together from the website mathwithjanet.com. We also are going to need a paper clip, and then our other number line that goes from 0 to 1,000 but counts by tens instead of ones is going to be useful for us today as well. All right, Math Champions, it's time to get started. Let's play math. When you download and print the number line, it goes from 0 all the way up to 1,000, counting by ones. It's got each 10 marked off with a triangle and each 100 marked off with a larger shaded in triangle. This is designed so that if you print it out and you tape it all together, it's a really long number line. But if you don't want to have it stretched out throughout your classroom, either on the floor or on the wall, this design allows you to create an accordion style booklet so that you can flip each page, or you can spread the whole thing out and have it go across your floor or your wall. Now when you print it out and tape it together, it looks like this, and that is just fine. But I've taken it and I've done a little bit more with it. The design is relatively simple to give you the flexibility to use it how you see fit. I've taken that printout and I've actually put it on a different color cardstock as backing. Again, each of these is covering a span of 100 so that the ends of each page mark out different hundreds. Because I put it on that extra backing, I made some tabs to mark off those hundreds. Now the nice thing about those tabs is that they act as quick references for page markers when this is in the book form, but then when I expand it, when I use that accordion style expansion, that tab pops up and stands up to mark out the hundreds as well. So you can see that from the side that tab is popped up. So students who have this laid out on the floor can use that as a quick reference as well. It also logistically acts as a nice way to easily clean up the accordion booklet when it's been laying on the floor, because you just grab those tabs and lift all of them up together and then it'll all fold up into its accordion book. Now in this design, I've also made a cover, a front cover and a back cover for the book, and that acts as a nice way to hold and store it. Now, the idea with this is that if a student is trying to round a number to the nearest 10 or the nearest 100, they can find the number on the number line and mark it with a paper clip. Here, I have marked off 674. Now that we've located 674 on the number line, if we want to round to the nearest 10, the next thing to do is to decide, all right, which tens are surrounding our target number. Our target number here is 674, and the two tens that are surrounding it are 670 and 680. It's a good idea also to make sure that students understand that when we say we're rounding to the nearest 10, the tens are the numbers that we would say if we were skip counting by tens. Once they've identified the tens that surround that 674, we are going to ask them literally. We're not even going to use the word rounding yet. We're just going to say, all right, which of those tens is 674 closer to? Which 10 is it closest to? Out of all of the tens that we would say when we're skip counting, 674 is literally closest to which 10? And in this case, if students do a visual comparison, it won't take them too long to realize that 674 is closest to 670. Now, if we needed to round to the nearest 100, where do we find our hundreds on this number line? Well, we can either look at the dark gray shaded large triangles on the edges of the pages, or we can look at these handy dandy tabs. So 674 is here. Again, those hundreds are the numbers that we would say if we were skip counting by 100. 600 and 700 are the hundreds that surround 674. And so again, the question is, which of these hundreds is 674 literally closer to on the number line? And it is literally closer to 700. And that's not difficult to see when you have this visual in front of you. When we are introducing students to rounding, we don't even necessarily want to use the word rounding. Instead, we want to ask them questions. We want to give them problems to solve that get at the meaning of rounding before we even call it rounding. When you're introducing this concept, you save some of the tricky ones for later. You give students a chance to master a lot of the more clear numbers before you throw in something like 750. When they go to 750, here it is, right in the middle of this page on our number line. This isn't too difficult to ask students, which 10 is this closest to? Because it's on a 10. It's already at a 10. The 10 that it is the closest 10. So 750 rounded to the nearest 10 is just itself. But then when you ask them to round to the nearest 100, this is where they might say, well, I don't know, it's the same distance between 700 and 800. The rule about what to do when you're halfway between some hundreds or when you're halfway between some tens is just that. It's a rule. It means that we don't have 100 that this is closest to. There's a tie between 700 and 800. And we kind of always decide that when there's a tie, the bigger number wins. And so when we have 750 and we're supposed to round to the nearest 100, because it's exactly halfway between 700 and 800, because there's a tie, this will automatically round to the 800. Even though 800 isn't necessarily the only closest 100 to our 750, it's the one that wins so that we all can come to an agreement. Once students understand the concept of finding the nearest 10 or finding the nearest 100, having that rule about who wins when there's a tie is not that big of a deal to students. They usually can make that transition pretty easily because it's built on an understanding, a conceptual understanding of the meaning of nearest 10 or nearest 100. After students have had some experience with that accordion number line, eventually you can transition to this number line that also goes from 0 to 1,000, but counts by tens instead of by ones. On this number line, each 10 is marked and each 100 is set off in a rectangle. So again, students, if they are trying to take a look at 419, and if they are trying to round to the nearest 10, the first thing they have to do is locate 419 on this sheet, and they know that they have to go into the 400 block. And then after that, they have to go past 410, but not quite to 420. They can use some approximation to say that 419 is somewhere right in here. If we're rounding to the nearest 10, the two tens that surround 419 are 410 and 420. 420 is almost obviously the closer 10 to 419. So if we're rounding to the nearest 10, we're going to round up, so to speak, to 420. If we're rounding to the nearest 100, the two hundreds that surround 419 are 400 and 500. They're on each end of this line of our number line. And if we are visualizing that 419 is right here, literally the closest 100 to 419 on this number line is 400 rather than 500. So if we were rounding to the nearest 100, we would round down to 400. Again, this is a tool that can help students transition to being able to round completely mentally, but it's also a tool that students who struggle with rounding can use to help them visualize the rounding process. This has been Math with Janet. I'm Janet Moore. Thanks for playing math with me.